Las presentes, por favor apague o ponga en modo de silencio su teléfono celular. En caso de activarse la sirena de evacuación, mantenga la calma y diríjase a las salidas de emergencia en la parte frontal o posterior del lado derecho del auditorio y siga las instrucciones de nuestro personal y brigadistas. Los servicios sanitarios se ubican en el cuarto piso. Si requiere de información adicional, por favor, refiérase a nuestro personal presente en esta actividad. Se les recuerda que en este auditorio es prohibido fumar y consumir alimentos. Gracias por su valiosa cooperación. Le deseamos una feliz estancia.
Buenos días. Ya vamos a iniciar la
Good
sesión,
morning.
así que vamos a dar unos 5
We are
minutos
about to begin.
para
Let's
recibir
have
también
5
a la gente que
minutes.
está en
So
el refrigerio
everybody
y empezamos en 5 minutos.
get ready.
Buenos días. Les pedimos a las personas de atrás que si por favor pueden tomar asiento para
Please
iniciar
take your
la
seats.
sesión.
Just about to begin.
Buenos días a todos y
Good
todas.
morning,
Muchas gracias por
everyone. Thank you
acompañarnos en el Día por la
for
Democracia aquí
being
en
with
San
us
José, Costa Rica.
in San Jose.
Les damos la bienvenida
You're
a esta
most
sesión
welcome to this
sobre el
session
fortalecimiento del
about
compromiso
strengthening
cívico y
the
político
civic
de los jóvenes en
commitment
Centroamérica.
of
Esta sesión
the
y la próxima
youth in
es
Central
organizada
America.
por
This
la
session is
Cohort de Juventud
organized
y Democracia.
by the
La
cohort
Cohort es una plataforma lanzada como
of
parte
Youth
de
and
las
Democracy
acciones de
was
la primera
launched
cumbre por la
about the
democracia
actions
el
after the
17 de
first
enero de
summit
2021.
in
Estamos
2021.
muy complacidos
We're
de
very
tener a
pleased
jóvenes
to have
centroamericanos
Central
de
American
casi de todo el mundo
youngsters
en este
and around the
encuentro.
world in
Así que
this
bienvenidos a
meeting, so
todos.
welcome everyone.
Yo estoy muy complacida
I'm very
también de contar para
pleased
esta sesión
to have in this
con
session
el Viceministerio de
with
Juventud y
Vice
Derechos
Ministry
Humanos. Le
of
quiero dar
Youth,
la bienvenida
and
a la
I
señora
want to
Crystal
welcome
Ward
Crystal
Hudson,
Ward Hudson, which
viceministra
is
del
the
Ministerio de
Vice
Cultura y
Ministry of
Turismo.
the
La
Ministry of
señora Ward
Culture
es
and
la
Youth.
viceministra de Juventud, profesional en trabajo social con más de
Social
8 años de
worker with
experiencia
more
en la
than
juventud,
eight
impulsando el desarrollo,
years of experience in the
integrando a las
public sector,
comunidades,
integrating
trabajando el
communities and
fortalecimiento del
strengthening
liderazgo
the leadership
de los sectores
of
sociales y
social
jóvenes
sectors,
emprendedores de la provincia de Limón,
entrepreneur,
comunidad predominantemente
young
afrodescendiente. La señora
persons
Ward
of
es
Limon.
activista social
She's
y
a,
promotora de los
she promote,
derechos de las
she's
personas
promoter
jóvenes por más de
of
10
the
años.
rights of
En el
the
2012
young for
participó
more than
como
12
asambleísta
years.
de la Red Consultiva
She
Nacional de la Persona Joven.
participated
Es
in the
designada en la
network
Junta
meetings.
Directiva del
She
Consejo
is
Nacional
part
de
of
la
the
Persona
board
Joven durante el
of
periodo del
National
2013 al 2015
Youth.
y es presidenta del Comité
Is
Cantonal
part
de la
of the
Persona Joven de
Canton
Limón. Ha representado a las
Committee.
juventudes de Costa Rica en encuentros
Represented
internacionales
the
en
youth in
Panamá,
Costa
El
Rica
Salvador y Brasil.
internationally, Brazil,
Además, ha
Panama,
representado a las
Ecuador,
poblaciones
have represented
afro-costarricenses en
Afro-Costa
encuentros
Rican
internacionales
populations in
en
international
Nicaragua,
meetings in
Panamá y
Nicaragua,
Colombia.
Panama, and Colombia.
Desde el Instituto
Since
Holandés para la
the
Democracia Multipartidaria, le
Dutch
queremos agradecer a la
Institute, I
viceministra y a
want to
todo su
thank
despacho por la
her
colaboración a
for
la
the
organización de esta
collaboration
sesión
in organizing this
y durante
session
todo el día de la
and
cumbre.
throughout
Así que, por
the
favor,
day
nuestras
of
más
the
cordiales
summit. So let's
felicitaciones.
give a hand to the Vice Minister. Thank you, Daniela, for that introduction. Today we're honored with these activities promoting democratic spaces for the young of strengthening the civic commitment of youth in Central America. That's this panel. These are spaces that we consider are vital for generating real participation of the youth where their voice can be heard and to discuss aspects that are affecting them in their countries. As a host, Costa Rica has adopted to emphasize the topic of youth as a fundamental issue because they can make an incidence in cultural, democratic, social, and all the areas that are related to the human needs. We're very honored with the invitation of the United States for us to become the co-host with Zambia, Korea, the Netherlands. We're dealing with democracy and we have awareness that we have great challenges around the world. Now we have the convictions that these democratic principles are universal and this is recognized by all. Democracy is facing a lot of challenges, but we're convinced that democracy is interrelation with peace, state of law, and human rights. It allows to have a resilient society, sustainable, inclusive, that improve the conditions of life and the well-being of everyone. We have built a model of state based on human rights, seeking dignity and well-being of the youth. We consider that democracies that cannot be taken for granted, that we have to make a joint effort to make sure that the right effort of democracy, and that's why we need to generate real participation in the systems of our countries. In the case of Costa Rica, we have the national system of the youth, which reflect how we can generate a real participation for the youth. We have within our system consulting network of the youth to provide uh, access to the different youth groups for discussing the implementation of public policies. They analyze aspects that should be included, what are the needs that should be approached on the part of the government and its institutions within this organism. We have real representations of sectors from public universities, private universities, development communities, and para-university political parties, organizations, and NGOs, civil organizations that represent ethical and indigenous groups of the region. This provides visibility of each one of the sectors so they can contribute from their life what governments should tackle according to established policies. That's why I have to point out I'm very proud to have this system that is being implemented in Costa Rica because I'm an example of this system. I have participated for more than 10 years in it and allowed me to participate in different spaces where we've been able to grow as youth, as professionals, and as leaders of different sectors. That's why we have the need to keep promoting this in the governments to generate real participation, and so we are able to have voluntary models where youth can participate in different sectors and that they can generate a experience and to position their voice in different spaces. I want to thank the organization for allowing me to be here, and today I have the honor to provide a space for these youngsters that are come from different countries in Central America, from the school Escuela Democracia. They will share ideas in order to discuss the political commitment of the youth in Central America. First, I present Gracia Grande, the co-moderator of the panel. Gracia, she is a lawyer of programs of the Dutch Program for Democracy in El Salvador since 2018. She had coordinated the School for Democracy in the country with processes of studies for political stakeholders. She had been linked to different projects for establishing capabilities of young population in Central America, El Salvador. Since NIDA, he has had promoted dialogue between the social movement and those decision makers and projects oriented to prevent and eradicate violence against women, girls, political violence, and inclusion of other groups of the population traditionally marginalized. Next, Gracia, you have the floor. Good morning. Thank you, Cristel. First, I am co-moderator. Before anything, we have to set the context of the state of the art of the Central American region, specifically the Northern Triangle of Central America, where we have worked from this center of the youth. What are the hurdles that the youth, what hurdles they're having in this region of the world? I'll be brief. This is just establishing the context, and then we will discuss the representatives. This institute, this Dutch Institute for Democracy, we are organized together with the Court of Democracy and Youth. We work promoting Pacific, peaceful policies around the world. This Dutch Institute work. It's characterized by dialogue. We gather politicians, civil society, strengthening their capabilities, facilitating agreements. We work in building knowledge and the development of competencies, skills of all the political stakeholders to promoting informal dialogues, to work and cooperate in a constructive way in the problems that affect them as country and the focus in the region, because we believe the challenges we face are very similar but very specific in some cases, but we believe that beginning with the dialogue in the region we can find more integrated solutions. We work with the public sector of the countries where we have our interventions, from those politicians to be candidates before they become candidates, all the way to consolidated political leaders and also social leaders and communities leaders. And having an approach from the regional, national, and in the last few years is approaching the communities. In the communities we work with different countries to find what are the expressions of civil society, opportunities for dialogue that we can find in this local level. This is the map of the world where we, as an institute, work. We have presence in Africa, in Europe, Eastern Europe, and Latin America. In Central America, we have work in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, but we have relations with the rest of the countries of the region. These are the principles of our work. As I mentioned, we seek to work with ideological spectrum in each one of the countries. That's why our main principle is impartiality. We want to look seeking approach to all the political expressions. We don't have a particular favoritism with one of them. Inclusion, which is very important. In the presentation was mentioned, we emphasize in strengthening the capabilities of women, the youth, disabled persons, indigenous nations, and independent persons, and those that traditionally have been excluded in decision-making process in the countries we're working. Diversity in all our spaces, not only dialogue and education, but working teams, diversity of the staff. We have, starting from the last few years, of approaching local governments, expressions of the civil society that are working at territorial level to guarantee that our interventions would have the participation in the focus that can be given from the communities and the commitment of permanence. We guarantee that the persons and the working teams of the Institute and the persons that we work as partners to keep this relation and this commitment with the countries, the regions, and the localities we're working with. And then our focus, this session is framed in the civic space. From the Institute we have reconstructed through these three big rights: that are being threatened in the region. The first, freedom of expression, freedom of association, and freedom of meeting or assembly. We will develop this in the panel, but we think this is the right that within the institute we promote, and we need to expand them to have a wider space. And we work close with the youth of the youngsters in the Northern Triangle. We have identified there is a very low space for developing the civic space, and we find some characteristics that are very specific that we have collected and direct questions and direct events with the young. These are some of the obstacles. Frame, we have a general classification that the youth population is facing, have to do with the cultural level, economic level, and social level in societies, but these are some of the most visible manifestations in the case of El Salvador, and this is not just the work we do as the institute, but are of youngsters we have dealt with in different encounters in El Salvador. The first obstacle identified is the state of exceptions for more than 1 year now, limit directly the right to free association, and we have arbitrary arrests, limitations to journalists, limitations to different associations, more controls, formal controls for associations and foundations. In Guatemala, some of the obstacles, persecution, legal persecution to journalists, controls in NGOs for associations and foundations, corruption generalized in the state, forced disappearances, and control of the information. Honduras, weakness of the social movements, pressure to the press, prison of environmental workers. That's why all of this very similar. That's why approaching this region and guarantees, we need to guarantee to have spaces for dialogue between three countries. And so we need to find effective solutions. Solutions to these obstacles. Our main promotion is Schools for Democracy, where the youth that are with us are alumni. They participated in different processes in the countries, and we guarantee in these schools a process of education, diverse, with capabilities for political leadership, not related necessarily with the electoral arena, but we have included members of the political parties, men, women, in our educational processes. The main aspect of our interventions with Schools for Democracy, it's the development of knowledge in issues like political history and political development of each one of the countries, the development of skills that have to do with dialogue and attitudes that have to do with, for example, with communication, of how we can be a better speaker on the part of the leaders, and to guarantee to have a more effective job. Some of the pictures of our different processes that show the way we work and the approach that have to do the activities in order to develop attitudes and skills so they can be more effective. So let's get into the dialogue with the alumni of these schools to motivate the commitment of political participation in the region. Thank you for providing all of this information about democratic school and what you are developing. Now I'll present each one of the panelists. We have Nestor Ismael Ventura from El Salvador, Nestor, Executive Director of the Youth Association, AJUBE. He is an organization he founded in 2015. Nestor participated actively in the creation of the framework in pro of Salvadorian youth, the general law of youth, with the participation of the civil and political stakeholders. He has participated in the National Council of the Youth, instructing networks and the articulation and the work in collaboration with the civil society organizations in the oriental area of El Salvador. He has been an advocate of human rights, and let's give him a hand. Fernally Arroch from Guatemala. Fernally, she's an artist, feminist, and she's studying law. She's the secretary of the Department of the Young Artists for Social Justice. They, one of the epicenters of the immigration, is coordinator of the feminist collectivity and the speakers of the Walks organization. She's very active in promoting human rights and sexual rights and reproductive rights of girls and adolescents. Fernally seeks to promote social constancy, cultural and participation through art. Abner Brito from Honduras. Thank you. She's from Honduras. She's a lawyer from the University of Honduras, and he had worked in the program of justice. Cedars, he had worked at the association with Committee for the Free Expression in Honduras. He's specialized in strategic litigation in advocating emblematic cases about violence of human rights, against human rights, representation, and legal advice of those who are advocating for territorial and environmental aspects. He played a role in the protection against this advocacy. He of the Rio Guanipol, and in the cases of the liberation of more than 12 indigenous leaders. We'll open this section with some questions. We have a question for the panelists, and each one will have a respond. The first question: why you decided to participate and organize in the civic space in your country? Good morning, everyone. Everyone is very happy to be here, sharing this space with you and to meet with you here in the second summit. And for those who are struggling, I think there are two fundamental moments of the process that we decided to participate in the promotion of the civic space and advocating human rights, two elements that transcend the conscious and the feelings of human Means that first moment is when we see something and we concerns, alert us. And in that space that touches feelings and the reason, the youth, we decide to take action or not do anything. That's the first transcendental moment of the processes, at least from our experience and what we have shared with my friends. It has been very similar. They saw something that is not, well, something that moved them, that, and we decided to take action. The easiest action would have been not to do anything, to let things go their way, but we decided to take action, and that's the second moment of the youth and those who struggle for human rights, is to be part of the action. From being spectators, we won't be able to accomplish processes. You have to participate in the processes, in decision-making processes where we can transcend and contribute with the solution of those that we consider is bad. In El Salvador, we have decided in the promotion of the civic space that is becoming more and more into struggle wholeheartedly improve the human rights. Sometimes the focus, the approach is different, and that's what we face in the Oriental area where I live. Is the first real democratic exercise, which is if we want to struggle for something, but we have different criteria, but we have been able to have a common denominator, for example, in advocating for human rights, promoting the civic space. So we leave aside different criteria and projects, and we need to center in what we want, so our societies become just and human. And this is the path we're taking, especially in the Oriental area. It's where our organization work. Thank you. Good afternoon, each one of you. My name is Fernelia Roch. I understand because of different accents. In terms of the questions, I think I agree with everything Mr. mentioned, but I will add there are 2 or 3 more moments because of feelings. When we feel something is wrong, it affects our life and our work in our society. This wakes us up because we are moved to seek a change, to improve these realities. I think we need to know that what are our rights, and we learn to analyze that our realities are not good. Sometimes as youth, we have certain apathy, and we don't know how to demand improvement, how to demand from these civic spaces that have been abused, we start to improve. One way, as youth, as artists, that we have incidents in the societies to adapt. And we get adapted, not in the sense we accept them, and we think they are normal, but we adapt. We need to recoup them through social consciousness, through different artistic spaces to generate a more profound conscience in imagining the youth, because it questions us what we're doing, are we able to improve this for our future and our present.
Good morning to all of you, those attending here. For me, it's an honor to share this space with so marvelous people that are doing marvelous things. And from the question, I would like to answer, first of all, that we come from very similar realities, actually. We come from contexts, although it's true there are different situations, they are very, very similar. closeness, the language, and other ways of exercising democracy. So starting from there, I consider I'm going to add a fourth moment to what the colleague Nestor said, as when we're studying, when we have that tool of having access to education, which is a real privilege in our countries, it is necessary to provide something of what life has given us in abundance. That knowledge we have acquired in our professions, but there's some where we see contexts of violence, contexts of corruption that make us feel many times lack of, with no power. I say, what am I doing for my country? What am I doing for my reality? So there's where I have to begin. I consider that the most important tool that opened political participation is human rights, and not only the theoretical lunch. Looking for the communities, missing from the area of comfort established by the professions, and what best way, which is the best way to provide power and value to our ideas.
Muchísimas gracias. Seguiríamos con la segunda.
Thank you very much. We continue with the second question now. What were the hurdles you had to overcome, and how do you deal with them in social level? Differences between working at national level and at local level. I want to talk a little bit more about how it is to work at local level, because that is my experience. And it's difficult when being youth, it's not recognized, our work is not recognized. That I think that's one of the greatest hurdles we have, because although it has been said in other spaces during this week, it's necessary that people to be acknowledged that we youth are not just to be used, just to fill out boxes or for field work, but we have a voice, and a voice that must and has to be heard. So I think that this is one of the greatest problems we have, not being recognized or acknowledged, and not recognizing ourselves among ourselves. Because it is true that each one of our in our fight or struggle has a different type of agenda, but there are moments where those agendas have to come together, and recognizing the effort, the fight, the ideas each one of us as youth, because we're not just one type of youth. We are several types of youth. There's a huge diversity, and an ethnic diversity, culture, language diversity, ideology diversity. So I think it is necessary to the acknowledgement and self-acknowledged, coming close together to each one of us, like in these spaces where we can dialogue, where we can create networks, create tissues that we articulate actually from our struggles, because we have the opportunity of knowing different realities and make analysis of how can we apply it to our locality, in our department, in our county, in our city, in our canton. We can improve, and being a young person is not a hurdle, but rather a jumping board. Someone said yesterday that we're born with the seed of rebelliousness, and yes, we're questioning even language. So I think we have this opportunity of going ahead of what youth is. We're not invisible, because what is invisible does not exist. We are visible, we are here, and we can improve. Thank you. In attention to the question, I consider that one has to begin from the few to the lot, to the abundance. We begin our community and we go beyond that. So I think it's key. As an experience, we work with the closest youth we have, with friends, with colleagues, students. That is our closest outreach, we could say. And later on, we can move forward while we have transcendence to other experiences and have transcendence at local level. In my experience, I think that I began also at a middle level. Say I'm working at national level in all the country of Honduras, but we always work from the communities. We always work, we go to a place, we visit the community, and we see how the social tissue or network is torn, or how it is constituted. So to move ahead, it's important to understand the social tissue of the society. Yes. We have to empower those youth that are in the communities, that are in the places inside the country where no one arrives. So I think that local labor part is important before going to the national or transnational. Yes, and of course, the barriers to which youth face have been multiple, and as it's not only said by El Salvador, Guatemala, or Honduras, or Nicaragua, or Venezuela, and different colleagues have mentioned this that have been in these spaces. And in this area, one of where we have been breaking is stigmatization to the youth, of the self-centeredness that is still very latent, pervasive in our regions. There are very good leaderships, but they still do not give participation space to the youth. And I think that this is a very good moment from our capacities as youth to be able to combine those capacities with the adult leaderships that have done a significant work in our area, and that currently there are some styles and methods and there are processes to have incidents. It's necessary the combination of the experience of the adults, of the elders in the community work, and the skills of the tools with which the youth have. If we combine that, I think we could have a greater incidence, more significant incidents. Currently, one of the barriers that exists in my country, of course, is this exceptional regime that stigmatizes organized work of men and women. And to the question as to the difference of national and local level work, I had the opportunity specifically to be in a national space in the country, which was a product or the result of the approval and creation of the General Law of the Youth, which is a new law that it creates the National Institute of Youth and that creates the National Council of a Young Person. Although I represented my department, I'm from the Department of La Unión in El Salvador, Department number 14, we see from the but Department number 1, if you come from Honduras, because we are the border, we share a border with Honduras, our county. So there's an important positive impact in the national work. Especially I had the opportunity to be in the board of INJUVE, which is the maximum authority of the institution, voted by my colleagues in my department and on the region to be able to be there. There's important agreement because from there was real public policies on behalf of the youth, but local work, community work is much more significant because there's where we have the essence of the work, the reality, and the needs that the youth live. Because in the Los Sanchez community of the county of Chilanga, the department of Morazan, which was a very conflicted department in the civil war that occurred in El Salvador, where I found Areli, which is a community leadership, and she has a great work in her community. Their youth are still there, continue not to migrate, but they have many needs. And there's the community and the base work where I have found Milton, for instance, a county Antique in the southern side of the La Unión, which was a repopulated community where they found diversity of thoughts and criteria and culture, and they continue working to meet their needs. There's in the base work in the community where we find the sense and the thinking of the youth, the sense of the multiple needs that still in 2023 have not been solved, like energy, drinking water, access to education, access to health. So of course, contributing from the work we do in these organizations and adding up efforts with organizations that help us to strengthen our capacities, as has been the case of the Institute or the multi-partisan, we can achieve sensitive changes and see the voices and the faces of this youth. With this effort, with this process, with this exchange, I have been able to understand my work at the social level. I would like to add something else also, and this has to do with the community work. I want to invite you to reflect also a little bit, because it is necessary to know the communities of our countries. Our countries are large enough to host different realities, and it's important that we know these realities. What I live or experience in my department, Huehuetenango, Guatemala, is not the same that could be happening in Izabal, which is a department that's on the other side of my country. So it is necessary to make a comparison of realities to be able to know which have been those tools those actions that have worked for them and how I can apply them in my country or in my department or in my city. It is necessary to visualize the struggles of the communities of each one of the that are within our country to be able to make a more realistic analysis of what we can work and how we can work it.
Excelente.
Excellent.
Como líderes de los
And
diferentes
as leaders of the different sectors, we know that community incidents is the root of all the process. Thank you for those contributions. We'll continue.
sectores identificados,
Once identified these hurdles, how did you face them
aspectos o
and what aspects or what has worked actually? As human rights defenders, it is important to take into consideration that we're facing a long historic process of stigmatization against the work we're carrying out. In many of our countries, they stigmatize the labor of defending human rights. It is attached to the defense of people considered criminals or delinquents in many cases. So to retake a little bit that barrier of stigmatization, it is important to work also in awareness raising in the first moment. As a barrier, how have I torn down that barrier? Well, it's through my profession, through my work, that is communicating, having incidents in what am I doing and what I am doing, have incidents on the results that we're obtaining. That definitely those are positive results that can transcend or go beyond. In our defensorship labor, we use human rights strategy, consider a tool of social change through the representation of an emblematic case about violations of human rights. We can generate those tools of social change, make institutional changes, make legal changes, make changes on the awareness of the people. So I consider that from the defense, from the strategic litigation, that's been my key tool to try to break that barrier of stigmatization against defenders of human rights. I think that there's no magic formula to overcome hurdles and obstacles, the multiple obstacles or barriers we have in our work as defenders or champions and promoters of the civic space, but something that is working for us in articulated work in the eastern zone is to transcend or go beyond the person organized and to reach the human person. That is working, finding ourselves with the youth, not only in the training spaces or education spaces, not only where we debate on criteria or concepts, not only where we put on the table what I consider is democracy. Democracy is what I consider human rights is, but generating spaces where they know, for instance, when Nestor may meet a colleague, I'm going to mention names of colleagues that do exist in my country, that may meet the sense and the thinking of Katia, the sense and thinking of Mirna, the sense of thinking of Ingmer, the sense and thinking of Lázaro. And that is where we break that organizational scheme, that we become aware of why the colleague thinks that way or the other. It's because they have life in their community that has gone beyond. They have a training that has generated conceptual maps. So we do not go beyond the organizational part. If we do not do that, we will not be able to achieve to have a better click in the organizational work. Because in the training space or in the debate space, we're going to remain with the idea of the opinion of so-and-so, or the opinion of so-and-so, someone does not coincide with what I think. But there are some other spaces where we know the essence of the human being, because we must not lose sight, my dear friends, that the organizations, be them of civil society, the organizations be them of cooperation, the organizations, the political parties, we make them human beings, that where we feel, we think, and we reason. Why, in many cases, the decision-making spaces do not work? Because they remain like there, right there on the debate table. Because if my criterion is different than the criterion of that of the colleague, we do not reach a consensus. And we do not stop to think or to question ourselves, or to share why does he or she think that way. So I think And we try to practice deeply. That is a challenge also, but it's a challenge to face the reality that someone thinks different than I do. Because if someone thinks different than I do, it boils my blood because I want everyone to think as I think. And in democratic spaces, not everyone think the same. Although all of us here are defending human rights, the focus can be different, the criterion may be different, but how do we go beyond the real human essence, and how do we reach the feeling of the leaderships? And we put that feeling together, we're fighting together for a common cause. We have to go beyond the organizational part to the human part, so the process may be more significant. Okay, I'm going to get excited a little bit because this is a topic that passionates me a lot, and which is art. That is a different way of having insights on policies. We have to also go beyond the scheme that policy is something formal, something uniform, and that we can only do it in a bureaucratic way. Although the organization is important, also expressing free thought in civic and political spaces is important because that way we can show in a totally different way what we are experiencing, how we're feeling it, and how we can express it in a way that will reach not only the human reason but the feeling. Because many times when we do not understand something, because it comes to a technical language that's very complicated, and you have to understand that countries such as Guatemala, not everyone has a basic education level or elementary basic level, so we have to reach in different ways. We have to position ourselves in different manners. And there are many people, many youth that have talent, and breaking the stigma that art is vandalism or the art is just only like entertainment, because it is not. It's culture, it's society, it's life, it's freedom or liberty. So we have to think in new ways of doing politics, new ways of being recovering these civic spaces, because when they close themselves, how can we organize ourselves? The pandemic brought new ways to be able to organize ourselves and through the digital media, but digital media do not govern the written, they govern the visual. So we have to learn how to make use of these spaces in a different way. We cannot continue doing policies in the same way that has been done 30 years, since 30 years ago. We have to look new ways to have incidents. Thank you for this contribution. We'll continue with the last question, which consists in how have you conveyed to more youth the importance of organization and participation? Hello, once again. I continue with what I was telling you, art, but also understanding that we must know how to use these digital spaces. These artistic spaces, do not pollute them, do not politicize them, not polarizing them, to follow this line. That's a healthy line. We have to continue with this. And I like to talk about digitality. I don't have that much knowledge in digital, but I think we can use it in a wise way. We can organize ourselves. We can start having incidents in this way. So I think that we can, if we know what our fight is, we know what our problems are, we know what upsets us, well, let's do something. Let's not just remain thinking, oh, we're going to do this in a bureaucratic way once again. No, let us see how we can go reach that person that is illiterate or that person that has a hearing impairment. How can we be more inclusive so we can find new ways? And I insist through art in all of its manifestations. Yes. It is key to find yourself and understand the multiple capacities that the youth have in the different spaces. I also have coincided with Fernelli on the issue of art. And yesterday you mentioned this space, and I'm going to highlight it today. This important, the collaborative word and a network in the different territories, because there we discover innovating strategies of insights. There we discover different strategies of how to connect and how to reach and how to talk about the importance of the civic space and the space of democracy and the importance of democracy. And we have talked in these days about Why do people do not fight for democracy? Why there are many people, especially youth, that are not interested in the subject matter? And that's because they do not see, they have not made evident that democracy doesn't go beyond well-being for the population. How do we do to understand the youth, the people from the community, the other people, and even how do we do to understand professions that democracy is important, that human rights are important? Well, using the multiple tools that we have for the youth. Because just training, we're not going to achieve it. Just with art, we're going to achieve it. Just with spaces of articulation, we're going to make it. We have to combine everything. We have to combine experiences, combine improvisation. We need to combine attitudes of the youth, of the people, to be able to reach. In the training process, you know that we all do not learn the same way. Some learn listening, others learn observing, others learn touching. The same happens with the tools to connect with the people about democratic subject matters. We have to use multiple strategies to reach the sensitivity and awareness of people and make them understand that democracy is key in our societies. And that when these spaces are getting shorter, there's less freedom, less way of expressing what you think. There's nothing more that as a human being, it's the impossibility of saying what one thinks, impossibility of moving wherever you want to move in your own countries. So articulation is necessary. And as Fernelli said, for instance, El Salvador has only 14 departments. We have 22,000 square kilometers. It is a small country that I can cross it from Santa Rosa, Lima, my city, which is borderline with Pasaquina, as you're reaching Honduras, and I can reach Santana in 4 hours, 4.5 hours. But only in my department, between Santa Rosa, Lima, and Yayantique, and Tibuca, and Sparta, Concepción de Oriente, the realities of the youth are different, and we're in the same department, because I live in the center of my department, but there are some other colleagues that live in the coastline, but there are colleagues that live in the borderline with Honduras, on the border area with Honduras. So it's necessary, I insist, to combine the different tools and not square ourselves. And there's a challenge for the leadership. There's a challenge also to go beyond individualism and the leadership ego that sometimes exists in our territory, and understand that the other person also has a lot to contribute. That the spaces, in this space we're all important, and that in this space we'll have experience, accumulated experience, and we have a lot to provide on behalf of society that we so much want and need in my country and the country of all of us that are here. I coincide fully with my colleagues. Currently, we have tools such as digitality, social networks, to have incidents and communicate towards the youth the work of human rights, the ombudsman or of the defensorship office, and the incidents. I consider that strengthening control of the social tissue when we go to communities is important. It is important that these people empower themselves, acquire leadership. In many communities, they have not even reached the area of knowledge only. So as the colleague said, we have to integrate the tools that we use, knowledge combined with empowerment processes, leadership processes, and at the same time, the building and the strengthening of the social network or tissue. So it's an integrality, and by working with youth, it's mainly getting out of the established parameters of the rules of the conventionalism that have been established. And as Fernelli also said, to look at new ways of making policies or politics, and now communicating the importance of the defense of human rights. Okay, let's give them a good hand. We want to thank you for your participation, and would like to also contribute in this last question about the importance of the organization of the young people. From my perspective or point of view, I believe that it is necessary to be able to generate a sense of belonging for the young people, where those who are involved in leadership spaces may encourage the young people that are in other
a sentirse
spaces
identificados
to
con las
feel
luchas.
identified in the struggles or
¿Cómo
fights.
podríamos hacer
And
eso?
how can we do that?
Escuchándolos a
Well,
ellos desde
listening
sus
to them from
realidades,
their
cuáles son
realities,
los conceptos
which
que
are the
ellos quieren
concepts that they want to fight for,
no
and not
generando
generating
o
or
de parte de nosotros desde una
from our
posición
standpoint, from a position,
controladora,
a controlling position,
incentivar una idea,
encourage,
sino
incentivate an
permitirles
idea,
a
but
ellos
allow
desarrollar
them to
cuáles son los
develop
aspectos
which
de
are the aspects
participación
of
que ellos quieren
participation that they
realizar.
want to carry out.
Nosotros creemos que
We
generar
believe
una
that
voz real
generating
para la
a real
persona
voice
joven
for
es
the
como
young
pudiéramos
person
generar
is
estos
how we
espacios
could
de
generate these
participación para
participation
ellos
spaces
y
for
donde
them,
ellos puedan
and
sentirse
where they can
apropiados de
feel
estos espacios.
and
Una
appropriate
dinámica
these
muy
spaces. A
sencilla
very
es
simple dynamics
involucrándolos
is
a que
getting them
ellos
involved
mismos
in
desarrollen las
for
actividades
themselves,
que quieren
developing the
liderar
activities
en
they want
sus
to lead
comunidades
in their
y no
communities,
desde un
and not
escritorio
from a
imponiendo
desk
ideas de
imposing
qué es lo
ideas
que
of what
necesita una comunidad,
a community
porque
needs,
ellos están viviendo las
because they
realidades,
are living
ellos
the
saben
realities
lo
there.
que
They know
necesitan
what
sus
they need in their
comunidades.
communities.
Entonces dejemos
So
que ellos puedan
let them
organizarse de manera
organize
regular,
themselves, and
de que
let's
las
give them the
personas
liberty
jóvenes
that the
sí
young
puedan
people
tomar
can
decisiones
make
reales e
decisions, real
incidir
decisions,
desde
and have
sus
influence from their
comunidades, de sus
communities,
sectores y no
from their
necesitan
sectors,
estar en
and
un
they do not
espacio
need to be in a
burocrático
bureaucratic
o
space
oficialmente organizado,
or
sino desde
officially
la
organized,
naturaleza de sus
but from the
comunidades que
nature of
puedan
the communities
aportar a
that
un
they can
desarrollo
provide
integral.
to an integral
Así
or
es como
thorough
podríamos
development. That
generar
is
una
how we could generate
participación real de
a
todos
real
los sectores,
participation of all the
involucrando
sectors,
a todos
involving
los grupos
all
étnicos
of the
desde
ethnic
la
groups
diversidad de
from
toda
the
la
diversity
comunidad.
of all the youth.
Respetando estos criterios,
Respecting these
nosotros como
criteria, we
jóvenes que
as
estamos en
youths
espacios de toma
that
de
are
decisión
in decision-making
debemos de
spaces,
dejar de
we have to
lado
leave
el
aside
individualismo y el
individualism and
egocentrismo y
egocentrism,
permitir que las
and
personas que
allow
están
the people that are
trabajando desde
working
los sectores sean
from the
visibles, son
sectors
ellos
may
los que
be
están
visible. They're
generando
the
una
ones that are
acción.
generating an action.
Nosotros estamos con
We
la
are with the
responsabilidad de
responsibility
servir
of
como
serving.
servidores
We are
públicos y
public
debemos
servants,
mentalizarnos
and
en
we
esa
must
acción.
get mentalized in
Muchísimas
that action.
gracias.
Thank you very
Le
much.
dejo en este
And
espacio
now
en
I
manos
leave this
de
space now. I pass
Gracia
the floor
Grande.
to Gracia Grande.
Muchísimas gracias a cada uno de
Thank you to
ustedes
each one of
por
you
estar en este espacio.
for being in this space, and we continue with the second part. Thank you. Thank you, Cristel. Deputy Minister will have to leave in this moment because of previously acquired commitments, previously acquired from the panel, but we'll continue the conversation with our three colleagues. You talked about the experience of some strategies, innovating strategies that you have been using in your work, and I think that in the presential as virtual audience, there are people interested in more specific examples how you have achieved first to encourage or motivate more youth to get to join or to understand the importance of this instance that you have talked to us. So I don't know if you could elaborate a little bit more on which are these tools or strategies, specific strategies that you have used to motivate and raise awareness in more youth around you and your environment to participate in an effective manner. I think that is a very effective strategy because Nestor well said this. We do not have a magic wand or to say this is going to work or for a magic formula to say this will work this way and this other way. But an effective strategy that has been key in all of these spaces of encounters is the networking, being able to speak with youth of different countries, of different realities, to re-encounter ourselves, even the people of the same country, in a different space, learning, sharing. This is a huge strategy. I do not know if we can dimension the importance of what we are doing currently today, because not only do we come to a closed space to listen to three people from Central America, no. We're knowing a different reality, and it's different necessary that we come near, that we create contact and links, that we identify ourselves, that to know if these are that were useful for them. Well, they could also be for my reality with a totally different procedure, but I can apply it. So I think that this is a very important strategy, being able to connect ourselves to knit networks and be able to know ourselves and to know our different countries, neighbor countries, or those people that have had to travel from the other side of the world, from South America. So this is necessary. This is a strategy I think it's very important and to which we have to take the necessary value to continue working.
Specifically, what have we done in the Oriental part? And I agree as I mentioned before, we organize. The question, how can I do it, has to do with the audience and related to all of those in different platforms. What we did in the case of Zulema, who is from the municipality of Carolina, Northern San Miguel, is not just to provide them a narrative or this is the manual, follow it. No, we go to another community, get to know the experience of somebody who went through what you're going through. So we need to understand the work, the base of the territory. I share there are many experts in different topics, but those are experts that have not lived the reality of the territory. How can I assure Lucema the sensitivity about what tools she can use? So invite her to a process we generate from the organization, taking Zulema to the community of Bendición de Dios or Chilanga, Morazán, to get to know how Aleri, Milton, how Katia, how Mirna have been able to do it, to organize, and when they share with peers and the tools that we use to involve more youth has been more effective. Another one of the tools we're using, the exchange of the experiences. This exchange between those legal organizations that we're complying a standard framework limit us in one way, but we have many advantages. But since 2014, 2015, like Kahui became legal, the different hurdles we have gone through. But how this is helpful for those who are getting started. So combining this experience, combining the human and sensitive part of the leaders has been very good tool we have used. And collaboration is difficult for us as a hobby. We are working in Salvador. It's difficult to get resources. But can you imagine organizations that are not legalized, that do not comply with this legal framework, that different organizations, when they expect what about their needs, it's difficult for them for any activity. So it is important to evaluate the effort of communal efforts, and I agree with the Vice Minister, we have to transcend individuality, and we not to allow in this struggle to promote new leaderships, to promote new organizations. We cannot from our struggle to criticize. I close this intervention with this. It's important to evaluate the work that all of us are doing. My work is with the youth. I work about, a little bit about the environment, but some of organizations that work totally in terms of environment, I don't have the right to criticize their work. That's their struggle. I have to contribute as I can with them. And what we have mentioned with peers from other countries, in their countries they have this kind of competition, or I do it this, and this is the right way, and this is the way it should be done with different stakeholders. But we have to go beyond that, beyond individualism, and to value contributions and demands of the societies we are located. It's interesting for me. I was remembering one of the mottos of the Dutch Institute. Everything begins with a dialogue. I promote from the organization spaces of citizen stables. Sometimes we talk about the change of generations. How can we have this change without this intergeneration dialogue? As youth, we don't have a lot of experience, but we have the energy. We want to do something, but it's necessary to share with those who already have a long data. We need to promote this dialogue and to believe in dialogue. I firmly believe in dialogue because that's one of the bases of democracy. To have promoting these inclusive tables, to generate agreements, and to these agreements to transcend into derive in specific actions. So specifically, I have been promoting the space, the protection, promotion of dialogue. Thank you for your answers. I would like to know next, you mentioned about the work you're doing from art, from dialogues, from territorial work, like Nestor's organization, but what support of the ones you have received have been of most value? In order to motivate more youngsters to join. In our area, it's frequent. We have educational processes which are good. But beyond this, which this is generated by a lot of organizations in the civil NGOs. But what's behind this educational process? It contributes, provides tools for leadership, but this leadership, this organization just have this education. It's important. This there's an important role, especially in societies where the civic space is very narrow. When we have young organizations, when those advocates of human rights do not have the support of public institutions in the countries, what is left? They just need collaboration among peers. They just have the aid of international cooperation. So we need to transcend to significant tools for the organized youth, not just educational, but technical and operational tools, so they don't disappear. I have seen, before 2014, I have seen new organizations, and they end up, they're done in 2 or 3 years because they don't have the tools to maintain a resilience process. We have been able, thanks to the competencies, to take advantage of the spaces we are, like Cahube, like networks in La Unión department, and to take advantage, in our case, that we have access to subventions to strengthen our capabilities, to strengthen managing capabilities and resources managers. We need to learn this. It's a process. We have to comply in order to access to resources, to have a curriculum we show. But what can we show that we do not have financial resources? These organizations need resources but people think you should not give money to the young because they don't know how to spend it. In ACUI, we have gone through complying with all the processes in the Salvadorian legislation and by the organizations that finance us. But I don't agree that the youth don't have or cannot manage financial resources, because we have proven the contrary. We have seen from our young organizations, it's not just a goal in itself to feed ourselves. they're really agents of change in their communities. So we need to get together as peers and to get the support and the accompaniment of international organizations that are working in our country. Tools for managing, tools for using new technologies, but with a specific things that generate real competencies in the organizations. What happens when we have a project in the territory and at the end of the project, organizations just fall? They existed because of the project, but they didn't have installed tools, so it's important that tools to be installed and the organizations managing financial, technological tools to build and create new narratives to connect with the people. So in that sense, it's important to have the relation with peers, to get together with other organizations, and in our case, the significant support for AHUBI, the accompaniment of the Dutch Institute since 2018. In average, we agree in efforts that have been systematically supporting us so we can grow as organizations and to comply with requirements. One of the requirements is that organizations, we must have an official in charge of compliance. This was created by the controller of the country. We want to comply with the standards of the country, but how these organizations strengthen our capabilities? It's important to get together, to agree with our peers in our territory, but to get a real accompaniment, to have these tools installed permanently in our organizations, and together with the help with NGOs and organizations that help in our countries. I think it's fundamental. Operational promotion of functional competences. It's very well known that the advocacy of human rights, it's higher risk activity because of the context of violence, corruption we live in. So I think it's fundamental that the support should be in generating protection funds for these advocates and the population we work with. That could be a hurdle for a youngster to become an advocate. What will happen with my family? The fear. They fear their life, their integrity. So I think it's fundamental to support in terms of protection and to generate this connection networks among organizations to be based in protecting, self-protecting, self-protection and to strengthen this way. That's one of the ways aggressors work for weakening these civil society organizations. It's very important what you mentioned to be able to create these support unions of advocates of human rights, even if our strategies have been able to connect interinstitutional with international cooperation, is not sufficient because today can be speaking right now, but maybe something is not politically correct in my country and my family run the danger. This is not eternal. I want to enjoy my life as an what happens when we do not have youth because of acts of violence. We need elements, advocacy, of human rights, to have a support. Today, if I've been persecuted, I can go to El Salvador, Honduras, seeking refuge while I deal with security in my country. It's necessary to talk about this. Sometimes these struggles are very lonely, and we need to take care of ourselves. It's not just to have protocols, mental health, physical safety. In each one of us, from our places, we have an opinion, but I want to add something. This is just to reflect in the persons where civic and political spaces are not so close, like in realities of another countries. Is the need is for loving, to confront our authorities, to question their actions, and to propose initiatives that would improve those realities. Let's not just stay judging and criticizing. Let's propose actions that could be progressive, that have a future, that is not just in a project and that's it, we train 30 youngsters, but what else? Let's provide follow-up to these actions to create a real incidence, not just a momentum incidence. I would like to point out specifically the importance of the last thing Fernelli mentioned. It's necessary to about mental health and the leadership and all of us who advocate human rights. It's important in our context to have tools. Leaders should have tools to purify, to debug, to clean their soul. They don't need to be charged with negative energies. Can you live in a state of exception in a critical moment where you are being criticized and the progress you want to have is not taking you where you want to be, resources are limited, you cannot deal with all the requests from the rest of our organization, where you find different criteria, where you debate with the peers or you debate with people of the corporation, where indicators are so high you cannot have access when you accumulate all of this. So it's important to take care of mental health. It's another important tool of the processes and the projections we can have in the projects. It's been able to incorporate elements for human health of the leadership and periods for self-care. I have shared with some peers of you about fear. Fear is a natural feeling. It's not strange to feel fear, but in the case specifically, it's a fear that is non-paralyzing, does not stop us, calls us to action. But before this fear, we need to take care of our soul, mind, our emotions to have a more positive impact. That's fundamental. It goes through spaces of self-care, of mental hygiene, whatever you want to call them, and exchange of experiences, of alternatives. This worked for me, this going to the beach helped me, or going to the mountain, whatever. So it's important to care about mental health, because at the end, organizations and advocacy, we do it as human beings, and we feel, we think it hurts, and the realities are affected in our territories. Thank you. Finally, before the Q&A session, I would like to you could tell us shortly how do you think we can articulate these efforts from the youth or your organizations are doing from the Central American region. This space today, I think, is a fundamental, vital space to begin with an articulation in Central America. We need to go out without just commitments. We need to have specific actions to strengthen democracy in our countries. We have three organizations that will be united permanently before any situation, and I hope as other organizations join to have this openness to be able to progress in the advocacy of human rights and democracy in our countries. I'd like to talk a little bit more about micro, how we can articulate. Let's not fear the organization to work in politics is to change reality, specifically to those who are not part of an organization, so do not belong to a group. And from their struggles are individual struggles. They are not alone. You're not alone. It's necessary to get organized in order to obtain results. What we're doing today is to get organized, being able to hear, to create dialogue, to generate an analysis, questioning what I'm living. Do I have to go through, or we can do something better? We need to change reality. We need to work in politics. No fear. If you fear, let's work on that fear so it disappears. I think we all can do our part. We as organized youth in civil society, we're doing it. But it's important to create links of articulation in Central America locally. It's necessary that to have these other stakeholders that are in the territory listen to the youth. What we are demanding, we're demanding from the state, but we demand to be heard the international organizations that work in our territories. But sometimes we think that just thinking or establish a framework of standards is necessary, dear friends, to go to the territories, to get to know the realities of the organizations, to be aware of young organizations that need small actions, but for them are significant. These organizations are moving all the time. Immigration is taking place, so they're losing motivation. So with small actions, but with some actions in the territories, they progress, they advance. So we need to do our part. We're committed to do our. But I call to action other organizations, other movements, other national, regional networks do their part. I'm convinced that we have three types of persons: those wait for things to happen, those that fear when things happen, and those of us who do things to make things happen. This group of men and women that we have discussed during lunch, during breakfast, in the halls here in Costa Rica, different countries, I'm convinced we have decided to make things happen. Let's add efforts, real efforts, significant efforts, not from a theoretical framework, but with concrete, specific actions. And this way we'll have changes in our communities, our territories, in our youth that are badly in need. Thank you. We are opening the mic for questions. For the specific panelists, as I mentioned before, my name is Juliet. As a Bri indigenous from Salitre, I want to make a comment about to see what you think. We talk about human rights. We talk about been able to know
Hace un rato
realities.
pregunté,
Some
hice
time
una
ago, I
pregunta
make a question
sobre territorios indígenas.
about indigenous
¿Cómo es
territories.
posible que las
How
personas
is
que
it
estamos
possible
aquí,
that all of
que
us who are
somos
here,
líderes,
who are
que conocemos
leaders,
sobre
that are
derecho,
aware
todavía a mí me digan que a
of
mí,
law,
a
to
a
tell
los
me,
afrodescendientes, a las personas
do
con discapacidad, nos podemos meter
Afro-descendants,
en un
those
solo
with
saco?
disabilities,
Nuestras
can be
realidades son
placed in the
totalmente
same sack?
diferentes,
Our
pero
realities
una
are
persona que
totally
estaba ahí,
different. But
que la invitaron
somebody who
porque
was there, who
conoce
was
sobre los
invited
temas, me contestó eso.
about topics,
¿Ustedes
told me
creen que eso es
that. Do you
justo?
think
No
that
lo
is
es.
right? It is not.
No lo es. Yo llegué aquí
I
por pura casualidad,
got
pero también
here by
hablo por
chance.
líderes que
I
viven en
spoke on
territorios indígenas
behalf
que
of
están aún
leaders
más retirados, por
farther
hermanos
out
afrodescendientes, por personas con
territories,
discapacidad,
people
que
with
por ejemplo,
disability,
me encantaría
indigenous
que aquí
people.
la viceministra me esté escuchando,
Uh,
de 126 asambleístas
for
que toman decisiones por
120
todos los jóvenes
seats
nacionales,
of in the
solamente dos
Assembly of Justice,
espacios
only
hay
2
para personas con
spaces
discapacidad,
for
afrodescendientes muy
disabled
poca
persons,
participación, indígenas casi nulo.
Afro-descended
¿Cómo es
almost
posible?
zero. How is it
Esa es la realidad
possible?
que a mí me gustaría
That's the
estar
reality I
escuchando
would
aquí,
like to be
porque
heard
es una
about
lucha
here,
también de
because
todos
it's a
los jóvenes.
struggle of the youth.
Me gustaría saber qué
I would like
piensan ustedes,
to
qué hacen
know what do
ustedes en
you
sus
think,
países
what do you
también, porque
do
yo
in your
conozco
countries,
hermanos
because
indígenas de
I
otros
know
países que
indigenous
viven lo
of
mismo que yo,
other
que al
countries that
participar en
are
espacios
going
como
through
estos no se les
the
da,
same
no se les escucha
because
y
we
no
are
se
not
realizan
heard.
acciones concretas.
No
Yo quisiera
specific
ver
actions.
acciones
I would like
concretas
to see
respecto a este tema.
specifications about this
Gracias.
topic. Thank you.
Bueno, primero yo quiero abrazarte
First,
porque yo entiendo que
I
tu
want
lucha no
to
es
hug
una
you
lucha que
because
sea
it is
fácil.
not a
El que
struggle
te
that it is
invisibilicen
easy.
quiere decir que no
If
existes
they
delante de la
make you
sociedad.
invisible,
Entonces
it
realmente
means
es una
that you
lucha
don't
que
exist
duele
before
y yo
society.
estoy
It
totalmente de
hurts.
acuerdo contigo.
And I
No
agree
hay
with
que
you.
juntar estas luchas, porque
We
las luchas
can
que tienen las
have these
personas
struggles,
con capacidades y
put them
discapacidades
together, because
es
persons with
totalmente
disability,
distinta a las realidades que viven las
they
personas de
live
pueblos
with
originarios o
different
afrodescendientes. No podemos unificar esas
realities,
agendas.
original
Si es bien
nations.
podemos
They all
proponer
have
acciones
different
que nos beneficien a todos,
realities.
sí, pero
If
hay
we
que
can
reconocer
propose
esas
actions to
luchas.
benefit
Es
all, but we
necesario
need
que
to
cada uno
recognize
desde
these
nuestras
struggles.
trincheras les demos
And
esa
from our
importancia y
positions, we
esa
need
accesibilidad a
to
poder formar
provide
parte de nuestros
importance, to
espacios,
be
a
part of our
darles estas
spaces, to
plataformas
provide
para que
these
también tengan
platforms
visibilidad.
so
No
they become
solamente es
visible.
una lucha de personas
It's
con
not
privilegios. Si tengo un
is a
privilegio, voy a
struggle with
trabajar para
persons
que mi
with
privilegio
privileges.
beneficie a
I
alguien
want
más.
my
No
privilege to
somos
benefit
no
someone
somos
else.
individualistas.
We're
Tenemos
not
que pensar en
individualists.
la
We need
manera
to
de
think
cómo
on the
podemos
way of how
abrazar aún más, ser más
can we
incluyentes.
embrace
Entonces creo que
others to
lo que
be
tú decís,
more
estoy totalmente de acuerdo contigo y este es mi sentir.
included. So this is my feeling.
No sé quién. Hay varias manos levantadas, pero no sé si
I
hacemos
don't
una
know
ronda,
if we
quizás recogemos tres comentarios o
three,
preguntas y luego
come,
responden las personas del panel que
and
lo
then we
deseen
have
y
an
después abrimos
answer
otra
from
vez.
the panel.
Ok. Sí, bueno, a mí me parece muy interesante
think
también
it's
el posicionamiento que
interesting
hace la compañera y con respecto a la
about
representación de
my
las
friend
personas jóvenes en
position and the
Costa Rica.
representation of
Tenemos que hacer
youngsters in
una
Costa Rica. I think we have to
visibilizar si se está haciendo una representación verdadera de las
see if we
personas
have a
jóvenes
real
en sus diversidades.
representation
Costa Rica en su
depending
constitución
on
política dice que
the
es
diversity. Its constitution states
pluricultural.
it's
Y bueno, realmente
pluricultural.
se está viendo identificado en los espacios que tenemos, ¿verdad? Tenemos que hacernos esa
We
consulta.
have
Mi consulta
to
quizás va un poco más
check that.
enfocada
My
sobre el
question
tema del
has to
cambio
do
demográfico.
with
Bueno, Costa
demographic
Rica lo
change.
enfrenta, lo
Costa
está
Rica is
enfrentando, pero
facing
el mundo también va a enfrentar
also
ese
the
cambio
world
demográfico, en donde
this
cumplimos un gran
demographic
papel
change.
las
We
personas
plays a
jóvenes en
role.
que tenemos que estar
Youngsters will play a
construyendo
role. We
ahorita
have to
cómo va a ser
build
nuestro futuro,
how
pero
the
también estar
future
siendo
will
parte de
be
esa
and to
construcción
be part
actualmente.
of
Entonces,
the
¿cómo
process
podemos
of
generar ese
building up.
diálogo
How
intergeneracional
to promote this
para poder construir
intergenerational
no solo con las
dialogue
personas adultas,
to
sino con
build
nuestras
with the
personas
adults,
adultas
but
mayores, con
our
los niños y niñas, con las
older
personas adolescentes,
populations,
y poder
adolescents, and to
crear
be able to create
esos espacios de
the
diálogo que son
spaces
tan necesarios para
for
construir
establishing a
en una
dialogue
democracia.
to
Entonces,
build a
creo que,
democracy.
esa sería mi
So I
consulta.
think
¿Qué-
this
qué vamos a
would
hacer?
be
¿Qué
my
acciones
question.
tenemos que
What
proponer para
actions
ese
do we
cambio
have to
demográfico
propose for
y
this
poder construir
demographic
una
change and
sociedad
to build
de
a
diálogo
society
que es
of
necesaria
dialogue
para
that is
las
needed
bases de una democracia?
for the basis of a democracy? Thank you.
Solo vamos a hacer la ronda y después abrimos para el-
We hit it around and then we open for more questions.
Buenas, primero que todo, mi nombre es
First,
Mesúa, soy
my name is
de
Yesh Mesua.
Panamá.
Indigena Meravi from Panama. My question was also related to the topic of the inclusion of ordinary peoples. Although we know that the participation right now in this form of democracy has been a little bit minority-wise as to ordinary people, but my question was also addressed or targeted to the gentleman from Honduras. So how has been your vision of the adversities that you have faced to implement civic and democratic spaces within indigenous communities? Although we know indigenous communities, we all have different cultures, different traditions, and different cosmovisions to implement or share within our communities. So I would like to know, how has that experience been for your country and of different communities and different originary people or native people? Because it will never be the same. Every young person, indigenous young person, or Afro-descendant, or young person with disabilities, we all have different realities. Even in my country, where there are over 7 original native peoples, are different visions as indigenous people. It will not be the same. My need will not be the same that the Nobi or the Kuna youth, because we do not live the same. We do not even share the same beliefs, and our visions will also go in different ways. But at the end, we may get together among all of us to achieve something jointly as a youth. Thank you. We'll take one more question only. Okay, my name is Julia. I just want to make a comment and a question. I had the opportunity to talk with colleagues, brethren and sisters, because we indigenous call ourselves like that, we native. There's no race, no color, and the blood, because the blood we all carry, I would say, a rebellious and a warrior. And this week of participation, I've seen a lot of minorities, as my brethren and sisters, indigenous people said, and I would like to hear young indigenous people in front that actually commented the reality of the countries. Obviously, we, as other countries, we're going through different realities because we're many indigenous people and Quechua indigenous or native people. But my question was also towards the fact that we cannot, I believe, as we talk about human rights, to leave aside the LGBTI community. As you know, in my community, we work with LGBTI with the hand because we have some indigenous that are trans, lesbians, or gays, obviously. And the indigenous rainbow, that's a very large data, but how can we help them for them to feel free? But they, in my country, also, they are being assassinated in a brutal way because they want to be recognized by a right that does correspond because they're human beings. But the fact that because they are lesbians or trans or gays, it's like that their rights, they have no right to live in the labor or professional field. So they're also indigenous. So how do you help them? I would like to rescue from you, when I return to my country, how can I make that link? Because the fight is one and only, but we as youth leaders of different countries of Latin America, Central America, and all the world, that we could be here, leaving here, with what commitment do we go back? What will be the link that will put us together after this? Because after this, I know that many of us will going to stop getting in touch with each other. Many of us will not talk to each other. But how do we keep that contact? How can I tomorrow communicate with you and tell you, look, brother or sister, colleague, this is happening to me. I have a political persecution. Where can I go? Where can I go right now? Because unfortunately here, you as youth, I am 22 years old, and since the 20 years old, I've been persecuted by politics. I cannot be in one single place. I have to be moving from house to house, so the politics cannot silence me or quiet me. So I think that these are points that we will have to work in hand by hand with the indigenous people, also with the LGBTI community, because it's important for them to be visible. During the process, all this time I have not heard, or maybe I have not heard, that you have not mentioned the LGBTI community. I think it's for like the LGBTI community and the indigenous people and people with disabilities. We all have different realities, Nevertheless, we always look one single struggle or fight. That is the union, the strength, and the war that we will have to go through. And we want freedom. Only with justice we're going to achieve it. Thank you.
Vamos a
Thank you.
abrir ahorita ya el panel.
Now we're going to listen to the panel members to answer these questions due to time reasons and because there are many more questions.
Ronda siguiente.
We will do a following round.
Ustedes responde cada
So only one of you answers one of the questions. There's one that exclusively for Abner.
la primera.
But the first one,
Me dicen
you tell me who would like to answer it, which is what actions can be made to link people, youth with other demographic groups as we share a society. First, I join to the call of inclusion of different youths and different expressions in spaces such as these ones. I think that's a good moment that those of us here that we can talk and make visible those that are not here, that we know that can contribute a lot in these spaces. This happens to us in something that's so small that we do not know all the people that does human rights defense. Imagine how can it be in such a large territory as the multi-expression that we have here. What can we do? Well, I think that it is key. One, since we have met here, since we have seen each other here, now that we're here and that we coincide here, let's have a real and genuine exchange of contact information from what we do in our territories, propose a real and genuine will, and not, as a colleague said, just stop talking to each other and oh, who's writing to me, but establish that real link between organizations, see what real actions we can carry out from our limitations, our poverty, and from the complicated that it can be just to work in our territory, in our own territory. I think that is key. As I said, there's no formula, but we start from a real exchange of context information, WhatsApp, phone number, Instagram, email, and from that point see what actions do you do, what actions can I do, and what actions do we consider. We will not achieve that overnight, but let's establish that real, genuine link or bondage, and I think that from here on we can make significant things. And the question was how to mix youth with adult people with the childhood. How do you think can that be done, or what actions can be carried to foster those intergenerational dialogues? I think the first is we have to make the first step. Someone has to show will. If they're not showing a will of acceding as like elder people, working articulate man, probably they don't want to see it. So if I'm convinced that it's important to articulate within, I have to give the first step and look for their places in the adequate moments to coincide with them. And of course, if I don't work the issue of childhood, see what organizations does work them and to accompany them with them. Because one of the difficulties is sometimes the civil society organization we have to want to embrace all of the topics very much. I think that we also must start from the reality. We can have greater expertise in one subject matter. In our case, is youth. But if I want to work the issue or subject matter of childhood and adolescence, I have to link with an organization that does so. I, for instance, in Ahubi, we do not work this issue of LGBTI work, but we articulate with an organization that is called Amate, that work, they're experts on LGBTI subject matter. We call them, we look for them, and we coincide in them. And that part also, the Dutch Institute has been a great collaborator of coinciding in those spaces. I think that it's important that we take advantage of the space generated, in our case in El Salvador, of the NIM, but that we generate also some spaces. For instance, the next summit, I'm going to say something that's very daring, but it should be organized by ourselves, where we can visualize those youth, where we can visualize that those populations that were not able to be here because we know them. So it's important that we take advantage of those spaces, but that we take or generate new spaces. Thank you. On a specific question, I want to express that I share a lot your opinion. Definitely, in our countries, we live in the context of exclusion against indigenous communities. I want to say also that I am in a learning process. First of all, this has to do with unlearning to learn again, because these are different cultures. And that's what I do when I visit a community. It's a challenge. It's a real challenge. but an imposition is not established at any moment. Only you can only provide them the support that we provide because we're living a context of a lot great violence, a context of concessions or in territory of compromising that many indigenous territories have been criminalized. So my labor is providing that legal support, that support and protection that has not been provided, but we continue learning. And I fully agree that these spaces also definitely they must be positioned representatives of indigenous community that have never have been treated in an egalitarian way because they're not the same realities. Thank you, only. And the last question for Nelly. My apologies, I was taking some notes. How to help the youth that belong to the community. I want to clarify our sexual diversity because there's a huge sexual diversity. I, as a feminist, I think the feminisms work very well with LGBTIQ plus because they are partners in the fights or struggles of each one of us. Yes, yes. It's necessary to visualize these fights, bring these topics on the table because although in our governments it is not, at least in Guatemala, it's not penalized or punished being homosexual, being a lesbian, or being part of that community, but it is something that socially is not well seen. And there's a lot of stigma and rejection, indifference towards this subject matter. So how can we bring them together? How can we bring them here talking about integral, including education and sexuality? I love speaking of this. Maybe I'm going to stray from the dynamics of today, but this is necessary to talk about because these are also human rights. They're democratic rights, being able to express yourself freely, of which is your sexual identity or gender identity or your sexual preference or sexual orientation, something that allows us to live freely, and it's necessary to live in a full democracy. We speak about this. We cannot lose focus on this struggle. It's good that you have mentioned this because sometimes one wants to speak of many things, you end up speaking very little. So I think that the spaces of the questions and comments are being very appropriate as the other participations, the previous participation. And yes, in Guatemala, there are many organizations that work with LGBTIQ plus and sexual diversity communities. And let's see what are these organizations that work in our countries. Let's visit them and see how we can partner with their fights. How can we support them? How can we raise the banner of these people that are invisibilized? Thank you. We open for the next round of questions. Microphones, please. Good afternoon. I'm Abelardo Nari of Panama. I comment to complement the topic about inclusion and diversity. I think that that narrative to which we appropriate that much about the diversity of youth to move it from this mere discourses to concrete or specific action, and by specific or concrete actions that are become visible. And I say this because although it is true I can have empathy with the situation of someone with a disability, but I cannot speak for that person with disability because who does not experience that, does not feel it, and does not understand it, as they say in my country. So it's important that we begin applying the differentiated focus on actions because our policies, our programs, our laws, our constitutions talk about that diversity. But then if we have the regulatory frameworks, why do the indigenous people, the Afro-descendant, the refugee, migrant population, and other populations still continue feeling excluded? Why? If there are regulatory frameworks, and here we're not here we're beating our chest because they're very nice and colorful diagram documents, very nice, but we have to look to see how we apply all that in simple actions. If I summon or invite it, I need to look the way for their significant representation of indigenous, of people with disability, of refugees, migrants. There should be representativeness. And that is an attention call that I make to the summit for the next one, where we can have here deaf youths, blind youth that imply investments But many times we know that the budgets are not enough. Let us not, we don't know how to play this, but we have to do it and we have to invest. And we have to know that the youth are rural also. Because many times we have the urban youths are the ones that arrive here. So we need to look for the way and start changing the narrative to concrete or specific actions and then finishing up that hegemonic white narrative, because we have to name it. That comes from colonialism. So when I do a mapping, and with all respect to my colleagues that are here, I see majority a specific group. And if I phenotypically make a map with my eyesight, I come to see that they are excluded. And we appropriate the 2030 agenda, but many of you that left behind, not only behind, but left out. Thank you. Good morning. I would like to leap to another space that is not directly linked to the diversities, but rather this goes in line with reflecting about acquiring real agreements. That is something that we take in, that is moving into actions to be people having impact, generating change. And I would like to start from the apparent democracies. When we have apparent democracy, apparent rules of law, there are elections, but there are no real conditions for this democratic exercise to be. There are no freedoms, there are no equal conditions, the political parties are limited, the politicians are persecuted. And I think this is an important call, because when we talk about the care of human rights, from the participation from democracy, that there are real conditions for there to be democracies, to be respect, where they have respect of liberty. We have to think what can be done. And I think something important in conclusion is, what commitments are we acquiring? What commitments are we placing on the table, and somehow are we going to work? And what are we going to do? How are we going to articulate? How are we going to have a conversation to remain from here on? So I think that these are part of the commitments that we have to start thinking about. I support the commitments that we have to put on the table and start thinking not only what did we do, what could have been done better, but now we're in the moment saying, and what are we going to commit ourselves? Because apparent democracy, there are many in the regions and in the world around, and it is something, a growing trend, attractive towards we're heading. But I think it's much more important that as from youth, from the leaderships, how do we propose specific activities to prevent this to continue happening, and in processes that are arising, how to mitigate them. So more than a question is just bringing this to the table, asking ourselves, all of us, which are the commitments that we're acquiring, and the ones that we're all going to bring on the table, so that tomorrow when we're in a new encounter, we don't have the same subject matter. We'll be talking about different problems, because the activities are being taken to mitigate what we have been talking about today. Thank you. And the last question. Good morning, Alberto from Panama. And certainly, I joined those voices of inclusion. And I had a school that was my school to learn, and I was working with peasant country, rural side communities in Panama. That was the first experience leaving the university. And it's true, we would talk about exclusion, at least in my country's experience. It's necessary to think in the country, rural youth, countryside youth, that youth that will not be in this space, they cannot come because on a daily basis they have to work on the land, because that's how they gain their lives and how bring food to revenue to their homes. And the concept with the something we want to get together in this space when the real schools are out in the fields, in the country fields. We had a work experience that is sustained in Panama currently with a project of a juvenile pastoral of youth. That we had this project. We're going to go. Yes, we're going to have to work on the land. Let's go. Let's work the land. After we work the land, we sit down under a tree. Let's talk. Ask ourselves, what do we feel? How do we feel? That part that we talk about mental hygiene. Youth that many times feel frustrated because they cannot go to a high school. They cannot go because it's far away. There's no access. Youth that maybe do not have technology or do not know how to handle Instagram or Facebook, but they're out in our fields they're out there. They're that live representation that we also need to highlight. And I say, I don't want to talk on their behalf because it will be a lot to talk about that what they live or experience. Because I tell you this because I lived and experienced with them and share with them, and thinking it's not easy when you have to plant the land day on a day, and a pandemic was coming saying, "Oh, we come saying stay at home." But how does a peasant can't tell stay home? We have to go and plant the land. You can tell, yes, organize and participate. They did not know what is participate because on a daily basis they have to work the land and go get their food stuff. So we, as a research in that process, as an academic process, promoters of the territory, we also have to be with them. We have to learn to get a work tool and together with them work the land. And do you know what? That helps a lot. That part of understanding what the colleagues of the indigenous areas have said. The cosmovision. Sometimes it's a very regrettable when you go to a cooperation organization and you tell we have to understand the the cosmovision and to their start project they tell us that's not part of us because ours is our subject matter is democracy. Yes, democracy is consensus, and consensus you can only create it if we understand the cosmovisions and integrate them to our daily life. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Hay
Thank you.
muchas manos levantadas,
There are many hands
pero no tenemos
up,
tiempo
but we have no
porque
more
la
time
agenda del día
because
sigue,
today's
los
agenda
eventos
continues,
siguen,
the events
pero
continue.
creo que, bueno, ahorita
But I
vamos
think
además a
right
la
now
pausa del
we're going to
almuerzo.
stop for
Creo que
lunch
todas
break.
las personas que
I
estamos
think that
aquí
all of us here,
seguimos en el
we
evento,
continue in the
seguimos en los
event, we
movimientos,
continue in the
y creo que
movements,
vamos a poder
and we're
tener
going to be
muchos
able to
espacios
have
para
many spaces
conversar
to
de
talk
manera siempre presencial.
in
Pero
a
no sé
presential
si
way.
igual
So
las dos compañeras
I
que
know the
están
two
de pie,
colleagues that are standing
le
out.
pasamos el micrófono.
We pass the microphone.
Una ronda más.
Ok.
Ustedes
One more round,
y
you two,
terminamos
and we'll
con la
finish
compañera.
with a
Okay.
colleague.
Hola, ¿sí me escuchan?
Hello, do you read me?
Bueno, mucho gusto, yo soy Kendra Hall.
I'm
tengo
Kendra
18
Juan.
años,
I'm 18 years old
parte de la comunidad
and part
afrodescendiente
of the Afro-descendant community in
parte
Costa
de la
Rica.
representación de la
And
Red
part of the
Nacional de
representation of the Afro-American youth. We have not been launched, but we're working into that.
Yo quiero decir algo.
I wanted to say something.
Es un
This is not a
comentario.
question, this is a comment.
Porque veo que cuando
Because
hablan de
I
todos
see
los
that you're talking about all the values and that we've been vulnerable, how we're vulnerabilized here in Costa Rica. I talk about the indigenous people. Believe me that Afro-descendant, I'm not jealous of the fact what the indigenous mentioned, the indigenous mentioned, and the people with disability. Where are we, the Afro-descendants here? In spite of the fact that here, because in spite of the fact that many organizations, it's a very small percentage of Afro-descendant communities of young activists that we have in this country. I think that when you talk about powers, talk about Afro-descendants, because in this country, people do not believe that there's racism here. That if you see your danger, the black people, you don't get close to that because they want to rob you, and they make comments on my hair. I've heard it, but I want that when you talk about vulnerabilized people, you talk about Afro-descendants. When you talk about the summit, you don't say what we mark the indigenous people, the people with LGBTIQ plus, and the people with disability, and we mark the Afro-descendant people. I came here to listen. But actually, if you really want to get into this world of politics, because I'm not the one sitting there. I don't want to say that the struggle, the fight that you had as people in your country, I don't want to invisibilize that. But I just want to say if the youths are the ones that have to, because why don't you listen to me? Why do I have to listen to you? It's not a personal comment, okay? Please understand. I want that, please, when you organize summits, think, do you want to come here to talk? But in 5 or 10 years, we want the next generations to come to talk again. So 5 and 10 years after they come and talk again, actions. Actions is what we need in this country. I do not know how in the United States, but I'm still thinking, but in this country, we're still missing many things to be considered a democracy. Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Roxana from Peru, Cusco. First, I want to thank the invitation, the consideration. It's such an important event. It's the first time I participate in this. I come from the network of indigenous people in America, the Caribbean. The platform is a regional platform, or they organize youth, civilians, and leaders in the framework of the democracy, political, that's called to the youth participation. It is important to see this in my way of observing it, and the little biodiversity of participation as such, and listening the voices of the youth. Youth, for instance, in general, it's important to highlight that action of participation, and also here highlight some participation of the people preceding me. What are we going to take home from here? What are we doing? In the framework of that, it will be very good to make a declaration of the youth that are present here, so that, what for? So that that be sent, or and there, if there's a next summit, those ideas are being matured. That not only remains still here, but we're talking about participation, inclusion, many things. But what are we taking here? The colleague, my dear colleague and country man or woman, what I'm going to take back to my country, and the others here present may ask this. So it would be good to make a declaration. The first one in the morning, they mentioned about, there were some panel members that mentioned, I forgot the name, the term as such, recommendations. They would like to know, I ask, if among those recommendations, in some paragraph, do you have the topic of inclusion of the indigenous youth? Because the indigenous youth as such, we have different ways of organizing ourselves, or participation, of doing political action, of doing democracy. That's why I invite, and that among the recommendations we include those terms also, so that the governments and states may take into consideration. Besides that, and the participation of the youth is very little, and those who are up to this space is very difficult, especially for those of us who are racialized, criminalized. I think the spaces are these ones are to bring those terms on the table, those concepts. So we take that into consideration. Sometimes we have to get to those spaces in order to demand that right. It's a right that we have as any others, and that has to be respected and taken into consideration. It has to be listened, so we can listen. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon.
Con todas, con todos. Mi nombre es Lía Ceballos de
I'm
Perú.
Elías Ceballos from Peru.
Creo que la democracia
I think that democracy will always involve the participation of all the citizenship in its diversity. Understanding that we have come out from a post-pandemic context where the youth and the majority have been the ones that have faced more the inequality gaps. Understanding the situation in education was very difficult. The labor insertion is also. We see that there's a differentiated impact on the young population of countries in Latin America, but even more differentiated on the populations in situation of vulnerability of the youth in our countries. In that respect, for instance, I bring you example in Peru. We have the National Secretariat of Youth, which is an entity, a political strategic entity, process of youth. Nevertheless, they do not have young representation. Where should assume the political representation of this entity should be young people. They are prepared that we have them in Peru, but they do not assume the representation, and it's an entity that belongs to the Ministry of Education. So, what strategies of articulation can we have to talk, dialogue, articulate with our states, and strengthen the social and political participation, understand the context of pandemics as one of the contexts where the young population has been most affected, and understand the political context that we have. Peru is facing a difficult political context, so what measures can we take from the regional articulation to strengthen those spaces? Thank you very much.
Abro a alguno de los compañeros si quiere responder la última
Could any
pregunta
one
sobre
of you
cómo se
provide
podría
an
hacer la
answer
articulación entre los jóvenes, pero también con las
about
instituciones
this
públicas y con el
articulation?
Estado.
In the case of El Salvador, when we created the general law of youth, was not created by a political will. It was the pressure of the youth we organized demanding a framework. What did we do? We found with different expressions youth requesting a framework of standards. We generated a summit, a country that would be hosting a summit of different countries. There was pressures from different organizations and together from different departments from the 4 regions to pressure to sit those candidates, and the effect was so powerful that they sat these candidates to sign a first agreement of youth. Signing this agreement, committing the candidates, we were able, once the government came into power in 2009, it was pressured by the youth to establish a legal framework. With all of these efforts that have been mentioned, your voices and your demands in different contexts are the same we have in our countries. So youth need to be her relation with youth organizations to compromise to these candidates to generate the commitment to sign a document that it would not be obligatory, but it generated a commitment with the youth. These youth pressured the president to present a bill to Congress, and these same youth pressuring with different political powers in order to approve this framework, and that's why we create the general law of youth. And it created the institute and a space of articulation and representation of CONAPE. Finally, we were able to have this framework, and we have this law that suffered different changes, positive. We had 8 representatives, then 14. I was part of the generation when there were 14 of us from Departamento de la Unión, but the conditions are not always favorable. The conditions and the frameworks are there, but those in charge to articulate those efforts don't generate a positive impact. We need to put together efforts to keep struggling, that it's permanent. If we don't have the society we aspire to, we need to keep struggling. As a strategy, I would like to add that I emphasize to start these actions in different communities. In my department, we have 32 municipalities. We were able to have the youth public policies. This process was by lobbying knock
Cuando uno lo hace, le pierde el
doors.
romanticismo a lo que es la juventud.
This is not
Porque hay
very
que viajar.
romantic
Eran
from the
6 horas
point
de
of view
camino, 8 horas de
of the
camino,
youth. They
viajar entre
we
montañas.
had to travel
Realmente había
8
mucho trabajo que hacer,
hours
ir a
in the
hablar con personas
mountains to
adultas de
talk
municipalidades,
to
de áreas rurales.
those in
Realmente
church
es un trabajo
municipalities
que
in rural
cuesta,
areas.
pero
It's a
es
very
importante empezar
difficult
desde lo
job, but
pequeño
it's
hasta,
important
hasta que
to get
poder
started
crear
with
un
the
nicho de
small
trabajo
steps.
bastante grande y hacer
But
presión
you,
a algo
that's
más
why
grande
you
como sería la
create a
política
niche
pública de la juventud a
in
nivel
order to
nacional.
establish
Entonces
a
creo que si
nationwide
esto puede servirles en sus realidades,
youth
comiencen en lo
policy.
comunitario,
So
comiencen en sus
begin with
municipalidades,
community, begin in the
comiencen en sus
communities,
consejos
in the
comunitarios.
municipalities,
En Guatemala
in
existen estos
the
consejos comunitarios y ha habido mucha apertura para el diálogo, pero a veces no la hay y hay que hacer ese lobby para poder
we
empezar a
need
trabajar
to
desde lo
lobby
pequeño.
to
No
work.
nos turbemos porque no podemos
Let's
alcanzar
not
lo más grande. A veces
be
sí
frustrated
queremos
because
transformar
we
el mundo,
don't
pero no podemos comérnoslo
deal
todo.
with the
Entonces
big ones.
empecemos desde lo comunitario.
First of all, no, let's begin with communities. Again, yes, as Fernelli mentioned, from communities. Another strategy that we apply is to work with emblematic cases. We can have an incidence to establish different processes, to change legislation and structural change in our societies. Even the results is not short-term, it's necessary to begin with this type of struggle. Thank you. Thank you to all of you who are here. We were here for 2 hours with good participation. I think there are a lot of questions. Somebody launched the question about what commitments we take with us, what solutions, or what do we need to discuss in the next summit, maybe next year, to have more diverse spaces and with more participation. And we took note of all the organizations who are related to the summit to generate not just panels such as this, but to work in joint tables we can discuss and hear each other. Thank you. I think we're sharing the same working line of interest, and especially we are aware that many are not here, but those of us who are here, we can strive, we can struggle with what we understand. The summit will go on. We'll still have time to have more dialogue. Thank you.